If you don't exactly get along with your parents, have you ever wondered what it would have been like if your parents were Japanese? Sounds like a strange question, but some of the headaches you're dealing with right now may not exist with them. For example, they won't argue with you whether LGBTQ issues are right or wrong. They probably won't kick you out just because your politics and religions didn't match theirs. Lose a job and have to move back home? In Japan, you usually don't have to worry about that. Your old bedroom has been turned into a home gym. Nobody's gonna ask you to chip in for the water bill either. Stay a monk for 10 years? Nobody finds that particularly shocking. Sounds pretty good, right? But honestly, you know every deal comes with a price. Everything I just said is true, and whether you actually want to live that way, that is a completely different question. Let's flesh out the whole picture a bit more. As long as you're not married, it doesn't matter whether your startup failed or you simply never had a job. In Japan, it's completely normal to keep living with your parents. In fact, Japan has had a name for this for decades. Back in 1997, Japanese sociologist Masahiro Yamada introduced the concept of parasite single. Some people spend their entire life living with their parents. They don't work, they don't socialize, don't really leave the house. As long as there's food on the table, life goes on. You know what gets me? You never have to worry about your parents bugging into your room, waving a help-wanted ad they found on the street, or bringing someone you're dating home and immediately getting thrown out either. Well, as long as you don't make a big shoot of it. Your parents will often cook your meals, wash your socks and underwear, and if you want privacy, that's fine too. Just tell them not to come into your room while they were cleaning, and in most cases, they'll respect that. Everything I've said so far is real, but only if you're able to survive the social pressure that comes with it. You know, in Japan, if an adult child never becomes independent, the social judgment will brand your entire family a failure, and that means your parents can't hold their heads up in front of the relatives and friends. As for that shame, some parents refuse to ask for financial or social help even when they're under enormous pressure. Japan even has a well-known term for this, the 80-50 problem. Parents in their 80s still financially supporting their children in their 50s. Your parents will be torn constantly. They want you to go find a job, but they're afraid of crushing your confidence. They're desperate to know why you're not trying harder, but they're afraid of upsetting you, which is why they're always torn over whether to sneak a look at your private diary. On one hand, they blame themselves. They wonder if they've raised a child who brought shame to the family. On the other hand, in practice, they're doing everything they can to take care of their daily life. It's as if they spend their whole lives swinging back and forth between harsh disciplines and total indulgence. And of course, being a child isn't easy either. Society already labels you as veiled and unfilial. Your parents don't just stay there and do nothing either. They'll still encourage you to find a job or get married. The difference is how they do it. They don't say if you don't have a job next week, we're cutting you off. They're more likely to say, you know, the neighbor's son's getting married next month, or your old classmate just had their third child last month. You know, in many countries, these comments don't really land. The kids genuinely think, they're talking about the neighbors, not me. But in Japan, everyone knows what those sentences actually mean. I've talked about this in earlier videos, so I won't get into detail here. But that habit of avoiding direct confrontation creates something quite unusual in Japanese families. Even when parents and children strongly disagree with each other, huge arguments are surprisingly rare. Instead, conversations shrink into safe topics such as nice weather today. You know what is the strangest part? You can spend years living under the same roof, yet never really know what the other person's thinking. So what if your parents treated you this way? Would you guys actually prefer it? And now, if you think Japanese parents only make gentle suggestions instead of faulting their children, you're wrong. When they decide something really matters, they can be every bit as controlling, sometimes even more. From childhood, many parents push their kids into cram school, entrance exams, elite universities, and eventually big companies. To be fair, that's hardly unique to Japan. You can see it across much of East Asia. Once you've grown, you're expected to get married, have children, build a respectable career. It's not your own stuff, it's the whole family's reputation. As for marriage, Western parents might say, if you marry that person, don't expect us at the wedding. Japanese parents usually won't say that. But in some traditional families, you may hear something like this. If you marry into a family with a tarnished reputation, that person's never setting foot in this house. And you think getting married is the end of it? Of course not. Japanese parents will push their married children to have kids sooner rather than later. To them, having children is not a personal choice, but carrying the family line forward. But you know what gets me? Sometimes it's not the son who gets the pressure at all. It's the mother-in-law going straight to the daughter-in-law instead. And once the baby finally arrives, the argument don't disappear. The difference is, the fight is not over who gets the final say in raising a grandchild. It's over whether the kid should be raised with strict discipline or happy first education. Another point that surprises many outsiders is, in traditional households, especially older ones, the oldest son's wife is expected to take care of their parents-in-law in their old age. Maybe you think it sounds unbelievable, but if I had to sum up the difference between Japanese parents and many Western parents in one sentence, it would be like an example like this. The Western parents insist the chicken came before the egg. You disagree? Then someone says say, if you keep talking like that, get out of my house. In Japan, the argument often never happens. Instead, your grandmother calls you a few days later. She sighs before saying, everyone believed the chicken came first. Why do you have to insist on being different? What will the other people think if they hear about this? What will they say about our family? Well, if you are the child, ask yourself honestly, could you live with that? Because there's a tragedy. Most children don't actually want to disappoint their parents, who actually want to embarrass their own parents. But you know what happened in reality? When all you hear is, you're wrong, you should be more like someone else, why can't you do better? Alright. If I'm already a disappointment, then I'll show you how disappointing I can be. I don't know whether you heard parents say something like, I've forgotten more than you've ever learned, because that raises a much bigger question. Are parents all over the world simply the same? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Parents all over the world are surprisingly alike. Let's skip the surface level of cultural explanation and go deeper. In 1974, Robert Trice proposed something called parent-offspring conflict theory. It offers a purely game periodic explanation. In any species that reproduces sexually and requires a long period of parental investment, parents and children will never have perfectly aligned interests. A parent's genetic interest always lies in optimally splitting its resources, time, money, future reproductive opportunities between itself and its offspring, and children, on the other hand, are genetically driven to demand more than what the parents consider optimal. That's the root of every parent-child conflict there is. No difference between parents in India, Africa, Scandinavia, or the Americas. So why are parents so obsessed with interfering in their children's lives? What they often say is, I'm only doing this because I love you, but the actual underlying reason is much more realistic. They've already sunk a massive amount of resources into raising their kids. From a purely genetic payoff standpoint, that investment has to pay off somehow, and the payoff depends largely on what kind of life the kid eventually builds. If they succeed, the investment looks worthwhile. If they struggle, the return gets smaller. So naturally, parents trying to steer the child's decision toward what they think is a safer path, a higher return path. That's why parents all over the world like saying the same things like, I'm trying to save you from making mistakes. You'll regret it if you don't listen. Doesn't matter if they frame it as individual freedom or family duty. The only real difference is how it's expressed. Japanese parents are heavily constrained by social norms, so their pressure tends to be indirect. And parents in some other societies are much more strict. They aggressively interfere their children's marriages, careers, and beliefs, and fly off the handle the moment things don't go their way. On the other hand, they don't want their adult children interrupting their retirement, yet they also complain that their kids only send money and never come back home for Thanksgiving. Both complaints can exist at the same time. You know why does a line like your mother doesn't love you anymore can hit so hard in America? Because people usually aren't offended by what's obviously false. They're shaken by what might actually be true. Research at Cornell University found that roughly 1 in 4 adults is estranged from at least one family member. After World War II, ideas like attachment theory and modern intensive parenting became incredibly influential. The core of these ideas is one beautiful phrase, unconditional love. But if we strip it down to the root, you'll find it's just a nice sounding line designed to please a particular audience. I know that might be a hard thing for some people to accept, but from the perspective of human nature, no relationship is entirely selfless. Not friendship, not romance, not even family. If someone tells you, I spent my whole life loving you unconditionally, even if you burn my house down, then trust me, that person is definitely a professional liar. And if you really want to know, does every society interfere with children to the same degree? The answer is no. At strongest in agriculture and patriarchal society. Because without an independent and safety social net for old age, a child's life choices directly determine whether the parents won't have food on the table late in life. In highly developed welfare status, by contrast, children don't usually depend on their children for survival. So the pressure often stays at the level of advice, even sometimes annoying. If you're looking for the genuinely hands-off parenting societies, yes they are. In small hunter-gathering groups like Han or Hadza, they often cited as examples. But how many of us would actually choose living that way? I'm not sure. And at the end of the day, I'll say the point of this video is not to criticize parents. I am a father myself. I went from obeying my parents to rebelling to being a parent myself, and now I get them. Maybe that's one journey almost all of us go through, whether we want to or not. Alright, that's it for today. If you also like digging to the root, hit follow. We'll dig it deeper next time.